Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will kick off in a couple of minutes as people log on and we allow for technology to work in our favor. While that is happening, you will see on your screen a couple of housekeeping messages and a QR code. So please, if you're on there now, scan the QR code that will take you to our website. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to keep up to date with some fantastic initiatives like today's webinar series kicking off. Now, in terms of other housekeeping messages, we are going to have a Q&A panel for you to post your questions, and our wonderful team will work through those, and we hope to answer them during this session. We will also use the chat to provide helpful links and to engage with you about today's session, news, and future events. So please, if you're joining us now, welcome. Just mentioning a few housekeeping bits and bobs. So if you see the QR code, please go ahead and scan it. It will allow you access to the Wilm&a website for you to subscribe and to keep up to date with many initiatives. We can see some wonderful numbers coming through. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. A little bit longer and we will then officially kick off this amazing series. Okay, so welcome. I think I'm ready to kick off now. This is fantastic. Good day to all from around the globe, morning, afternoon, evening. And welcome to our inaugural event, kindly sponsored by Saïd Business School and in collaboration with the Professional Women's Network. I am proud to kick off the Women in Leadership, Mentorship and Allyship webinar series. But before I do, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Leila Valterio, and I am the founder of Women in Leadership, Mentorship and Allyship, also known as Wilm&a. And throughout this webinar, we will be providing links and information on how you can join us on this leadership journey and discover the value of being part of a global community of cheer leaders. Our initiative here at Wilm&a is to keep the momentum through our leadership journey, the impact we continue to have on a global scale, and draw on the topics like career mapping, negotiation, and social impact, to name a few. We also want to draw on the experience of other female leaders, mentors, and allies through theory and experiences. Before handing over, I wanted to share a story I recently heard. It is the story of Sineska, a Spartan princess whose ambition made her legend in the male-only Olympics dating back 396 BC. She was the first woman to compete and win in the esteemed chariot races, but more so by boldly and proudly celebrating her victory, she erected a life-size bronze statue of herself at Olympia. By this action, she transmitted the message to women across the Greek world to overcome obstacles and to celebrate their accomplishments. And by the 1st century, women were competing directly against men in various events at the Olympics and winning. I really must thank Saïd Business School for this partnership, specifically the champions that helped bring this webinar to life: Sarah, Tindara, Aisha, Rola, and Co. And for my volunteers at Wilm&a, Christina, who will be joining us on the panel today, Vanessa, who worked on marketing with me, who's based in South Korea, and Rebecca, who will capture our insights today and turn them into a visual representation of our session that we hope to share with our Wilm&a subscribers, and many more that work and support me behind the scenes. I thank my mother for her story, influence, and impact, and those trailblazers that came before us. I give special thanks to Karen Hans, who was my head tutor while I was on the Women in Leadership program at the school and has been a champion of Wilm&a from the start. And of course, Kathryn Bishop, our host and speaker today. I am honored to have you inaugurate this webinar series and collaboration. Kathryn is an associate fellow of Saïd Business School and is integral to the team whose research forms the foundation of the executive education programs for female executives and women on their leadership journey. She is also the author of Make Your Own Map, Career Success Strategy for Women which I highly recommend. So please grab your beverage of choice and let's have a conversation. So over to you, Kathryn.
Thank you very much, and it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be able to be with you, and I hope to be able to have some conversation, albeit using the chat and the Q&A functions of Zoom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for about 18 to 20 minutes. Do post comments and questions as we go, and then we'll try to have plenty of time to respond and answer those. And the team will also be posting useful information in the chat, so go ahead and join in with that too. It's lovely to see all the comments rolling through with people from all over the world joining us today. I'm going to start by sharing my screen because it provides an anchor for the things that I want to say. You'll all know that this webinar, the inaugural webinar in what we plan to be a series, is called Map Your Success. And it seemed to me to be important that we start with a definition of the word success. You look it up in the dictionary, this is what you get. You can either be a success, a person or thing that achieves desired aims, or you can have success. The accomplishment of an aim or purpose, or the attainment of fame, wealth, or social status. What I like about this definition, the reason I've put this slide up first, is because it reminds us of one important point, and that is that your own definition of success is the important thing. And it's possible, indeed it's quite likely, that your own definition will change as your life develops and progresses. I've certainly found that to be the case. When you were younger or a teenager and people would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? I should imagine, perhaps like me or like many of us, you had a sense that you articulate what it is you want to be and then you just go straight for it. But of course, we all know that life isn't like that. And probably over the course of your working life so far, your definition of where you want to get to has changed. Your ultimate destination is a different one. And even then, your route to get to it will encounter winds and rocks and be different from the one you've planned. This is entirely normal. When you talk to many people, both male and women, the stories they tell about their career trajectory have precisely this sense of a plan which is subsequently changed by events, and a necessity of being responsive to both opportunities and threats that arise. This same point is illustrated when you talk to women leaders as part of a research project. The Business School has recently done quite a lot of research with women leaders, female CEOs, and also women who've been taking our residential and online programs. And those of you who've been through the online program or indeed our residential program may remember these three significant themes, these ideas that emerge when women leaders tell the story of their working life so far. They talk about self-acceptance, they talk about self-development. You all know all about that because so many of you have signed up for this webinar and have made the time today to be here. They also talk about self-management, both on a small and a large scale. Let me just say a little bit more about these three themes. If you want to read more, the reference to the article which summarizes these findings in the research is at the bottom of the slide. So this idea of self-acceptance, the moment at which you recognize yourself with all your strengths and with all those things that are limitations, we all have them, and acknowledge that this is what you have to work with, and plan to accept your potential and commit to making the best of it, coping with your own and others' expectations about priorities, thinking about the barriers that are sometimes put in front of you and how best to overcome them, learning to balance the priorities in your work life and in your private life too. That moment of self-acceptance, interestingly, it's not entirely 100% true, but interestingly, when men tell the story of their working lives, that moment of self-acceptance tends to come earlier. They talk about it happening at 11 or 12 or 13 when they're made captain of a sports team, for example. Not all men, but there's a general tendency. Likewise, when women tell the story of their working lives, there tends to be a moment of self-acceptance that comes rather later in life, in their early 20s perhaps. Again, not always, but that pattern starts to emerge from the research. And so one of the questions I guess we all have to ask ourselves is, when have I accepted myself as I am? This is what I have to work with. And when did I first do that? The second theme is the idea of self-development. This notion that you yourself, as part of the ownership of your working life, are responsible for proactively choosing what to develop, when and how. Not just relying on the annual performance appraisal conversations with your line manager, perhaps, to identify those things that that person thinks you should develop, but the things that you yourself want to develop, either formally or informally, finding a mentor, working with a sponsor, whatever it may be. And then finally, this notion of self-management, which operates both on the large scale and on the small scale. What do I mean by that? Well, on the large scale, the pressure to be authentic and focused on your purpose while still navigating a very fluid working world. And on the micro scale, something that will be touched on in later webinars in this series, the way in which you prepare for a particular negotiation, the way in which you might choose your influencing style for a particular situation, kind of confidently and consciously managing yourself and the deployment of your many strengths and skills to try to achieve success, whatever you define it to be. Now, all this sounds very good, but here's my proposition in this short presentation, and indeed in the book that accompanies what I have to say this morning. The proposition is that finding your way through a complicated and changing working world is precisely the same kind of challenge that organizations face. And they use a whole range of strategy, techniques, and frameworks to help them plot their own course. If they do it, we can too, as individuals, using those strategies on your own working life. So let me just talk a little bit about some examples of how that might work. And I'm really trying to be as practically relevant as possible in doing this. So if you look at the way organizations run their own strategy projects, do their strategic thinking, they tend to fall into, that work tends to fall into three phases. The examination of where you are now, the contemplation of where you want to get to, the to-be state that you're aiming for, and then the very necessary and practical questions about, well, how are you going to get there? What kind of journey of change are you embarking on, and how are you going to manage it? If you look at many organizational strategy projects or conversations, they tend to have three particular elements. This notion of purpose, what is the organization for, what purpose does it serve? And that's become much more significant in organizational life through regulatory attention to that. Obviously thinking about their resources, skills, products, money, physical assets that they have to use, and then looking at opportunities that might be available. You can illustrate these three using a simple triangle. And actually, what this does is remind us that in good strategy, in good organizational strategy, and in good strategy for individuals, you need to keep all three in balance. And I'll say a little bit more in a minute about what I mean by that. If your strategy just focuses on your own skills and resources to the achievement of your purpose, your definition of success, it'll have a strong internal focus. That's necessary, but not sufficient, because you also need to think about the external environment, the opportunities that may be available to use your skills and resources to best effect in trying to achieve your purpose. In other words, to put it simply, I may be very skilled and I may intend to do a certain kind of job, but if that role simply doesn't exist in organizations anywhere, or I can't get it, then the internal focus of my strategy is too dominant. I haven't kept all three elements in sync. Equally, if I randomly take opportunities that come towards me with no understanding or awareness of the skills and resources that I actually have, my career will be described as very opportunistic. It may or may not be interesting, but it's not necessarily going to help me in the achievement of my purpose. So those three elements represented in that triangle need to be kept in sync, and you need to connect the three of them. Okay, well, that sounds sort of understandable, plausible. How do you actually do it? Over the last decade, in working with women all over the world, I've identified 9 strategic models that are particularly useful in applying this idea of organizational strategy to you yourself. And you've got some graphics here that are taken from my book that represent some of the frameworks and tools that you can use on yourself. You can map this along those 3 elements of which we've just spoken: resources, purpose, and opportunities. You can also connect them to the 3 phases of strategy. You start with where are you now? What have you got to work with? In your moment of self-acceptance, what do you acknowledge as being your particular strengths? And then think about where you want to be, a very necessary question. You might say a very obvious question, but actually a question that's quite hard to answer. And there are 4 different perspectives that I've set out and worked with over the last decade to help people answer that all-important question. And then the third and final stage, okay, how are you going to get there? What practical steps are you going to take to help you to use your resources in pursuit of your purpose, capitalizing on opportunities that actually exist? Now, this literally looks like a journey. And in fact, one of the first exercises we get you to do is literally to draw your journey so far, your working life from the day you started to right now. And that can be an enormously revealing exercise, helping you understand much more about your resources. I could talk about any one of these particular frameworks and the way they apply to you, but as I move into the final stage of what I have to say, and I'm delighted to see that there are plenty of comments in the chat and questions coming up, as I move into my final stage, let me pick up just one of these, and it's this notion of transition. If you've understood clearly, accepted yourself with all your resources and skills, if you've articulated where you think you want to get to, your definition of success, how might you go about making that kind of transition? This is said to be an issue that's particularly relevant to us right now, as the data suggests. More than 40% of us are thinking about making a major change in what we do at work or where we do it. So let me pull this particular model out more clearly, and let's just take a quick walk through to try to illustrate the process of applying corporate strategy to you yourself. This model is called the Ansoff Matrix, developed in the 50s at Harvard Business School by a mathematician called Igor Ansoff. And this is a simplified version. You can see plenty of examples of this on the web. It's regularly used in corporate strategy. In essence, what it says is, where you are right now is that you have an existing product and you sell in your existing markets. If we turn that into a context that works for us as individuals, You look at your existing skill set, the things you can already do as if they were a product, and you think about your existing employer or client as if it was a market. That's where you are selling, you're using your skills and resources. And what this model says is if you want to make a change, there are various routes you can take. You can take a strategy of market penetration. You can become more significant, more well-regarded in your existing organization, in your existing role, and then as a result, perhaps having increased scope, increased opportunity to get stuff done. You could take a strategy of product development. You could improve and develop and add to your skill base, add to your resources, which would give you new opportunities, even in the same organization. Or you could take a strategy of market development. You could explore the opportunities to use your existing skills and strengths, but in a different organization with a different client. Or, finally, you could employ a strategy of diversification, taking a whole different set of products, skills, and resources into a completely different market, employer, or client. Each of those strategies brings with it different levels of risk, and there may be times in your life where one or other of them appeals to you more. But let me just give you a little kind of story illustration of each of them to demonstrate that this idea of corporate strategy can indeed be applied to you as an individual. Let's take the first example, the idea of taking your existing skills and strengths and applying them in a different market. Here's my example of this. Dame Kate Bingham, who was formerly chair of the UK government's vaccine task force. She is someone with a biochemical background, that's her professional academic training, and spent a lot of time working in the private equity sector, where one of the skills she developed was the ability to assess organizational risk. If you like, to make a business bet on where to invest. She took those skills into the public sector and was an extraordinarily able chair of the government's vaccine task force, able to place orders in advance of vaccine development completion because of her knowledge of biochemistry and her knowledge of how to assess risk. And as a consequence, she made a huge difference to the UK. Those of you who are joining from the UK may be interested to know that there's an article that she herself wrote or was interviewed for in today's Times, talking about her experience of doing this. So that's one example of making a change in your working life. Here's a second example. You may have come across this man, Andrew Cotter, sports commentator. During the pandemic lockdowns, found there were simply no sports for him to commentate on. He simply couldn't use his skills in the traditional market. So he decided to make some YouTube videos commentating on the behavior and antics of his two dogs, Olive and Mabel. He too, if you like, deployed existing skills, but in a completely different context, leisure YouTube. But he's then also adopted a strategy of developing his skills. He's written a series of books talking about his experience of being a commentator for his dogs, reaching a whole new market, using some writing skills that he's never previously had to use before. So that's an example of a different way of changing and developing your career. I have a colleague at Oxford who I've worked with for many years, and we get on very well. But in the recent pandemic experience where so much development moved online, her background enabled her to develop rapidly a set of skills to help faculty take in-person development and put it online. She became the go-to person for all of us. So in other words, she developed and strengthened her skills in the existing organization that she worked for, and has really become a very significant figure. We've really benefited from working with her. Okay, so what about this last and very I'm going to say risky strategy, the idea of simply deciding you want to do something completely different for a completely different employer. Well, let me tell you a slightly light-hearted story, which, as is so often the case, also has something relevant to say. Some of you may remember Monty Python's sketches from the last century, and there's a particular favorite of mine set in an educational, vocational guidance counselor's office. John Cleese is the guidance counselor, and Michael Palin comes in for his interview. And the guidance counselor says, "Good news, the psychometric results are now in, and I can tell you that you are absolutely suited to be an accountant. That is the job for you." Michael Palin is horrified because he says, no, you don't understand. I'm already an accountant. I don't want to do that anymore. No, I want to be a lion tamer, and I don't want to mess about. I want to start right now. I want to be there tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, starting to tame the lions. Well, it becomes apparent in the course of the rest of the sketch that he doesn't really know what a lion is. In fact, he thinks this is a lion, and it's actually an anteater. And it's an interesting and amusing example of the misconceptions and the dangers and the risks of simply deciding you want to be something completely different. But let me reassure you that it's not impossible. You can indeed move directly to a different environment with completely different skills. As in the 1970s, John Benham, formerly a solicitor, I don't know, perhaps encouraged by the Monty Python sketch, decided that he was tired of being a solicitor. He'd spent he says himself, throughout my legal training, I yearned for a circus life. I used to spend a lot of my spare time with circuses. And finally, he decided enough was enough. And in 1977, he packed in his office-based occupation and he started to work for a circus as a lion tamer. So, risky, but not impossible. So what I've tried to do in that brief summary is just give you a sense of what the underlying research is and how you might go about using the techniques that organizations use to make your own map, to find your own way to your definition of success, whatever it may be. I've tested this material over the last decade and poured everything I've learnt into my book, and you can see a picture of it there, which covers every one of these 9 models. But I think I'm going to stop there and see if there's anything people would like to ask and get this to become much more conversational. So thank you for listening. I hope that was suitably stimulating. Let's get into a conversation.
Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you. Thank you for such an insightful presentation and actually for everything that you do to advance women equality cause. So we have many questions. I will read some of them now. So first, Giovanna asked, Kathryn, was there a particular defining moment in your academic professional career where you felt that you needed to focus specifically on women and women leadership? And can you share with us that moment?
That's a really interesting question. And to be honest, it was something that had grown with me throughout my life. I went to a girls' school in the United Kingdom. I went to a women's college in the United States, and then I came back to Oxford as a research student. And the transition from being in female environments for education to being in at Oxford and indeed subsequently working in the city really demonstrated to me the benefits of being, for a part of your time, for an hour today, for a week, whatever it may be, working with other women on your development can be enormously beneficial. There are people who say, no, we must learn to swim in water. It's better to do development in the kind of environment that we find ourselves working in other words, with people of both and all genders. And there are also those who say that, you know, every so often it's useful to have a little pit stop with people who absolutely understand the particular issues that women face in their working lives. So it's something that's grown throughout my life. Great question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And then Flavia asks, once you understand where you want to go, how do you demand ask that from others if it is dependent of them as well? So how do you demand ask from others where you want to go if it's tied to them as well?
Okay. So this is about the realities of plotting your course. If you've been able to identify where it is you're trying to get to at this phase of your life, because I do think our definitions of success and the ideal destination we want to get to change, how do you go about it? Well, there are a whole variety of things that people talk about, and they can help you do this. Build a network. Talk to other women who are also trying to plot their course. Maybe where they want to get to is a bit different from where you want to get to, but they'll have some useful advice. Build a support group. Gather around yourself women who have strong coaching skills, who've worked in your environment, who could serve as a mentor or maybe even a sponsor for you. Keep an open mind to identify opportunities that may come up that might not look exactly like the ones you thought you wanted to go for, but might have something in them that could be helpful. For example, sometimes it's worth applying for a job, even if it is not quite perfect, or maybe you think you're not quite as well qualified as you might be. Twice in my life, I have applied for a job and not been selected and been a bit sad about that. But subsequently, somebody on the interview panel has got in touch with me and said, yeah, it was quite a good application, wasn't quite right for this role, but I would like to suggest that you try to apply for this, or can I suggest you sign up for this development program? And that kind of advice has been enormously helpful. So in summary, what you're talking about is a combination of sort of structured planning, you know, look for opportunities, keep in touch with people, network, and a little bit of opportunism. Keep an open mind for the opportunities that might arise. I hope that's helpful.
Love the answer. Well, myself. Then Marie Julia asks, which are the 9 strategies?
Oh, the 9 strategy models. Okay. So the first one is that triangle model that says strategy contains 3 elements: purpose, resources, and opportunities. The second one is the journey model, the idea of mapping your working life so far. The third one is the idea of a management information dashboard, just like the one that organizations use, to assess, you know, where are you spending your time right now. The fourth one is not really a strategy model at all, but it's incredibly useful. It's the Ikigai model, which comes from Japanese philosophy. The fifth one is the idea of articulating your purpose. The sixth one, I'm keeping track of these. I hope I've got these numbering right. That's the idea of literally designing your life around your purpose. So it's a sort of strategic alignment model, exactly the way organizations structure themselves around their strategic intent. We as individuals can literally design our life around our purpose. Then there's a model that tries to answer the question, okay, which areas shall I develop? What's worth investing in developing? Which of my strengths? And then there's the Ansoff model. And then finally, I think I've got this right, there's the notion of planning and experimenting, building your implementation approach through a combination of structured processes, targets, milestones, phases, and the sort of opportunistic experiments. Well, let's just try this. Let's buy this trade periodical. Let's go to this network. Right, I think I've got the right number there. Hope so. If I've missed one, it's in the table of contents of the book.
Perfect. Then we have an anonymous question. It says, I really enjoy your talk, and it makes a lot of sense for women thinking of themselves individually. But what about wider structural change? would love a remote working to become a new norm for me and others. And I can already see it becoming in the media the way in which women get left behind and the least desired option for those who want to get on. How do we work together to make wider change? How do we include this in our purpose?
So that is a great question. And of course, that's one of the reasons why networks like Wilm&a are so important, because working together is part of the answer to that question. Oxford's residential program is called Women Transforming Leadership, and what it's trying to do is exactly this point. It's trying to give women the opportunity to transform their own leadership, literally to widen out the range of leadership approaches that they want to use, and by doing so, to change society's notion of what leadership looks like, so that it's no longer a male with all the answers in the biggest office in the building. The recognition that leadership, system change leadership, can come from anywhere and everywhere. And that's also what the online program is trying to do. And indeed, that's to some extent what this book, my book, is trying to do, by giving women the tools to strategize and navigate for themselves, to help get them into positions where, working with others in their network, like Wilm&a, they can start to collaborate and open out these notions of what it means to be successful, to be a leader, and thus to make this a much more inclusive environment in which a whole variety of styles and skills is called upon to make our working world, to make our world better.
Beautiful, Kathryn. And thank you for sharing what Wilm&a means, because this is exactly that. So Naomi asks, how do you balance optimism with realism in applying these models? For example, looking at the self, you may consider the hours in the day as a particular resource, but it's easy to miss out time to rest, recover, etc. in the midst of the appeal of trying to maximize the output of the individual. How do you balance to ensure that resources aren't overexpended in the pursuit of success?
So another very good question containing that all-important word balance. How do we balance the many things we have to do? How do we prioritize and choose the things that are going to make the most difference to us, to our colleagues at work, and to communities and families outside? So a couple of things. First of all, recognize that your life will go through different phases, and at different times, some things will be more necessary or more important than others. There was one phase of my life where for 5 years, after a particularly painful experience where I missed something that my son was doing, I said to myself, if there is going to be a clash between something my children are doing and the all-important work meeting, for the next 5 years, I will prioritize what my children are doing, because they're little, they're going to grow up, this time is going to pass. And at the end of 5 years, I'll review that strategy and change it. And so this business of time stamping what you do in different phases of your life can be important. Secondly, balance is one of those words that sounds marvelous. My life is so balanced. Actually, balance is really nearly falling. I'm constantly, tipping too much this way, or maybe tipping too much that way, and you're constantly having to adjust. And that's normal. That's what balance is. If you were walking on a high wire, that's what you'd be doing. And that's where this notion of self-management comes in, that you're constantly looking and shifting and going, is this important? Can I skip this? Can I prioritize? I've got two more things to say, which I hope might be useful. When we did the research project with women CEOs, one of the things they said, rather surprisingly, was your working life is going to be quite long and varied. And if there's a 4 or 5 year period where you are deliberately choosing to go slow, where you're plateauing, where you're prioritizing something that's happening outside work rather than something that's happening inside work, don't worry about it. Your working life is very long. Most of us in an increasingly long kind of human lifespan can absolutely tolerate that. So think in phases. And then finally, there are times in your life when I have found this piece of advice that somebody gave me incredibly useful. And here it is. Only do what only you can do. There are some things that you are absolutely the right person, the only person who can do those things, and those are the things that must be at the top of your to-do list. There are some things that you are really not the only person who can do them, and you could even choose to put them on your to-not-do list. I have a to-not-do list. I don't iron. I don't need my clothes to be flat. I'm never going to iron. Don't have time for that. So I hope those little kind of comments might be some help in answering that all-important and very difficult question. There's some great stuff coming up in the chat, by the way, guys. I hope you're all watching it.
We have more than 20 questions and more than 250 people watching this live. So thank you all. So we have the first question from a man. Thank you, Claudio, for asking. So he asks, thoughts on how can men, colleagues, husbands, fathers, bosses, best play a valuable role in supporting women in successfully navigating their career maps and achieve success?
So another very good question. And there are a whole range of ways that one could answer that. Particularly, I'm really interested in the increasing focus on allyship, which of course is part of Wilm&a's title. And you're starting to see this become much more significant as an organizational issue too. I think the only thing I would add is that the material that I've spoken about today, the material in my book, is particularly useful for women, but it works for men too. I know that because I've tested it, I teach it, I've been teaching it over the last decade to both men and women. So one way of constructing those conversations to get people to help you is literally to share this kind of strategic approach with them. They will find it useful, and indeed the conversation between the two of you will raise perspectives perhaps that neither of you had thought of. So that's my recommendation on a next step for that one.
Great. I will pick a couple of more questions, and then we will do our best to answer the rest of your questions in our blog post in Wilm&a website. So there is a very good question here, anonymous one, that says, how would you suggest someone in her mid-50s, frustrated with her current employment, could start this process with later life opportunity and frustration?
So great question. I would strongly encourage you to take this strategic approach because there are some well-researched transitions in life, those pivot points in life. They come at slightly different ages for different people, but they're quite noticeable. One of them is called the 30s transition, where you've worked in your first job for a bit and you go, so is this it? Is this what I was working for? And another of them is around your 50s, where you are thinking about your third act, if you like. And there are quite a lot of books that are devoted specifically to what next, what's my third act, career pivot. One of my colleagues at Oxford, John Stokes, has written one with a colleague. I temporarily can't remember the name, but it's specifically about that transition. But these strategy models are absolutely useful for you at any stage, at any point of transition. And so I would strongly encourage you to take a look at them. Maybe you don't want to do them all. Maybe 9 models sounds like far too much trouble. Pick one that appeals to you, maybe focusing on the definition of your purpose and what success might mean to you at this stage, and see what insights it yields, helping you to go in a different direction. I hope you find it useful. I'm at that stage too, kind of what's next? What's my next act?
Great. I think, yes.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. So I will ask the questions that are just like about you so that you can answer them live. So one is, what do you find was your biggest limiting factor as a woman that had to overcome to seek success?
So my limiting factors have changed over time. In my 20s, they were about my range of professional skills. I'm good with words. I'm less good with numbers. I'm very good at reading thick documents. I'm less good at surveying a balance sheet quickly to identify what's going on. So the resistant limitations for me at that stage in my career were about skills. In my 30s, I had 2 small children and elderly parents, and my resistant limitations there were about my inability to prioritize properly and my unwillingness to sacrifice the quality of some things I was doing, to go, this needs to be perfect, but this one really 80% is good enough. And once I grasped that I could make choices about that, that was very helpful. My resistant limitations now, well, at my stage in life, I do know there are some things I can do, and I definitely know there are some things I really can't do. And I have really started to use the strategy of collaboration. So I work with people who have natural strengths in the areas where I have really never been very good, and probably it's a little bit too late. I love learning new things. I love to do that. But there are some things that I've always found difficult, and finding someone to work with makes all the difference.
Thank you. And this is a self-promoting question, Kathryn. They are asking if your book is available online. There is someone that Noor wants to buy it in Qatar.
Yes, it's available online. You can buy it from Amazon. You can buy it at any bookstore, brick bookstore or online bookstore, or you can buy it from the publisher. You'll find it in various places. Perfect. I hope it's useful.
Yeah, I bought it through Kindle, so if someone wants to know, it's available in the Kindle store too. One last question. So they ask you, how do you balance competing purposes, like being present and an involved mom, as you said before, and being a successful academic?
So my sense of purpose has changed over time. And sometimes it's changed reflecting what's going on in my life at work, and sometimes it's changed reflecting on what's going on in my life outside work. So, for example, in my 30s, my purpose was about making as much of a contribution as I could while still being able to put food on the table in front of the children. And that was both about money, making a contribution but still being able to buy the food, and time, still being able to cook the food. My children are now grown up, and my purpose is much more about focusing on learning and sharing and galvanizing and working with other people. So that sense of purpose must reflect what you yourself are interested in and want to do, which is why we often talk about uncovering purpose rather than generating it, because it's in there already. But it should also accommodate the needs of your various stakeholders, and that's exactly what organizations do. They have a purpose to sell a product in a particular market, but one of their major stakeholders may be a particular funder that needs results within 3 years. The process is exactly the same for us. One of our stakeholders may be a family or a community or children or elderly parents or whatever it may be, and their needs must be accommodated as well, built into your statement of purpose. That's why it's really hard to develop a statement of purpose, but that's why it's worth doing. Dina, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I don't know how, but yes. So thank you. This one was our last question. Thank you, really, and thank you all for asking these questions, for being in the chat, for being today with us. I believe it has been a great session, and I hope that all of you found it as insightful and powerful as I did. As I said, we have more questions in the chat. We will do our best to answer them in our next blog post. So moving on, there was a question for me in the chat, and they asked me, how have you felt the impact of Kathryn teaching on the online program, and what key moments have helped me in my role? So I believe I will answer this just saying that the program was the first time I really had time to just self-reflect, like 10, 12 hours per week. I'm a nerd at heart, so I really took every single question, every single video as something I needed to deep dive in, and it was wonderful for me. And it was so wonderful that connected me with Wilm&a, and I became their first volunteer because I understood that day that the issues I was seeing, and the issues I was not seeing because I thought, oh, I'm a woman, I can do this, they were there. And they needed to be acknowledged. They needed to be worked on. And when I was just thinking, how can I go around this? There was Layla and there was Wilm&a as a space, as a community to basically tap these issues, to try to contribute as Kathryn is doing, as the Oxford University is doing, and as I believe each one of you is doing just by being here today. So I will take a few minutes of your time now just to introduce you to Wilm&a. So, but first, allow me to introduce myself. So I'm Cristina Rondon. I'm a nature manager. I have been 15 years in the field. And as many of us, as Kathryn said, I do my best to balance a meaningful professional life with my many other roles. I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, a friend, a wife, a mother, an Oxford alumni, and a Wilm&a first volunteer. So Layla, Wilm&a's founder, as you know, baptized this community with the fitting name of a woman, Wilm&a, which means to dream and protect. One could say that Wilm&a was born as a perfect sequel of our women leadership program at Oxford. But in reality, in my view, women have been creating communities for millennia. We have learned the power of sharing our stories and supporting each other. However, the demands of this modern life maybe make us feel more connected and yet more isolated in our struggles. Wilm&a started as a book club, just to keep the conversation going and to continue to reflect on our learnings from the Oxford Leadership Program. But after the program, many of us felt inspired to pay it forward, to create more awareness about gender equality, to open crucial conversations to further advance women in society. Wilm&a happened to be just a perfect place in a space to do this. Layla's drive and vision help us to transform our relationship from being just online classmates to sharing our stories and struggles, to cheer each other up, and to remind ourselves not only to advocate for others, but to advocate for ourselves, to dream big. Wilm&a is a community where you immediately feel that you belong. Everyone is welcome. Our members are women from diverse backgrounds, like me, and in different stages of their professional and personal life. This unique combination of diversity, talent, and our shared purpose of moving the women equality forward, to pay it forward, creating a space that allows us to harness the power of empathy. We are all on this. Our stories, our successes, our struggles are somehow interconnected. I do believe that as women, we share a strong bond. So our meetings and interactions offer opportunities to work on our self-awareness, our self-promotion, and to continue to develop leadership skills. And we do this while having fun and engaging conversations. I really hope that by now you're asking yourself, how can I become part of such a great community? Well, our book club grew and became a website, a LinkedIn group, a mentorship program, and continues to grow. Even our book club, we changed the name to be a book club with a twist. So we meet online every third Wednesday of every month at 9 a.m. GMT. And it's called Book Club with a Twist because we discuss a topic, not necessarily a book. So each one of you can pick your own preferred method of learning and reflection. It can be a podcast, it can be a documentary, a masterclass, or your own life experiences. You can just come as you are. Just to give you an idea of how 2021 looked like, we started the year discussing resilience, then we got into the power of habits, reading Atomic Habits, then we went to Educated, and the last book or topic was about negotiation, using Never Split the Difference as our reference. For December and January, we are going to discuss nuances of culture and how that influences who we are to continue to work on our self-awareness. So we are inviting our members and all of you to read the culture map, and if not, you are just welcome as you are. So I just want to close saying that Wilm&a's first anniversary is around the corner. And as any other 1-year-old, our first year has been filled with growth, discovery, challenges, love, and support. We are looking forward to welcoming new members and to continue to grow. I thank you all for being here today, for supporting our cause, and for doing everything you can to advance women in society. Let's all be change makers. Thank you.
Amazing. I mean, I'm almost speechless, but that is so rare for me to be speechless. So I'm almost speechless. I have just been so engaged in listening to Kathryn, Christina. Reading in the chat has been absolutely amazing. Your stories, your questions. We can never get to so many thought-provoking questions in the time that we have. So we do want to try and give you a tentative promise that we would like to get to all of these questions and send them out to you in the form of potentially a blog post or a mailing, because we do want the conversation to continue. We do want the momentum to continue. This has been a fantastic and engaging session and is such at the core of what we want to do here at Wilm&a. One thing that I will add to some of the things that were mentioned in the chat and to Kathryn, I learned a saying a couple of years ago that I can do anything, but I can't do everything at the same time. So that has stuck with me, and that's what I try and use on a daily basis, that sure, I can do anything, but I need to lean on others, their natural strengths, where I can sort of do my to-do list and the not to-do list. So thank you all once again. You can see that QR code. We've tried to make it easier for you. Hopefully it's not too heavy on the QR codes in this session, but you can take that QR code to get straight to us to sign up. But in order to wrap up today's wonderful session, I'll flip over to let you know about what we're talking about next. So these times are changing in the space of leadership, and I am thrilled to be part of creating and championing the shift in leadership, and specifically women in leadership. You will see up on the screen details of our next session. And yes, I know, another QR code. So please do scan, do reach out to me if you'd like to discuss partnering with Wilm&a or giving us some feedback on what you would like to see. I noticed some comments about workshops and engaging in those conversations. We do have so many things set in motion to have those up and running soon, especially for 2022. We want to kickstart the year in a very fashionable style. So please do reach out to me. I am pleased to announce our next speaker. An ally, I must have to mention. So not only our speaker, but our ally, Paul Fisher. Paul is a program director of the Oxford Program on Negotiation, which he has helped to design and develop since its inception in 2004. He has also contributed to Harvard Business Review and The Economist. This session on negotiation will be focused on women in leadership, and I do hope you will join us. Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you, Christina. Thank you to the team behind the scenes. Thank you to my fantastic ambassador and champion, Aisha, who is an absolute powerhouse, and to many, many more. I do hope you can join us next time. Thank you.